Welcome to the Sales Lead Dog Podcast, hosted by CRM technology and sales process expert Christopher Smith, talking with sales leaders that have separated themselves from the rest of the pack. Listen to find out how the best of the best achieve success with their team and CRM technology. And remember, unless you are the lead dog, the view never changes.
Welcome to Sales Lead Dog. Today we have joining us Tyler Carey. Tyler, welcome to Sales Lead Dog.
Thanks, Christopher.
Tyler, tell us about your current role and your company.
Sure. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at Westchester Publishing Services, which is a U.S. employee-owned company. We're over 50 years old. We have offices here in the States, 2 offices in India, 1 office in the UK, staff and freelancers spread all over the world. And we help publishers make books. Essentially, we act as the content developers, editors, and typesetters on books, ebooks, digital learning products, and anything that you can put in your hands and read, whether it's on paper or on a device.
I love that. One of the things that I really have strived to do with this podcast is have a really wide array of companies on here. So as you know, as we talked before, I'm very excited to have a publishing company on here. So welcome to the show. I'm really excited to talk with you. Thinking back over your career, what are the 3 things that have really contributed to your success?
There's lots of things. I've been very fortunate in a lot of regards to have some exceptional mentors. The 3 kind of traits that I think have been really successful that I've been trying to pursue more during my career are certainly empathy with my customers and my staff. Humility, knowing that there's always going to be somebody far smarter than me in the room. I've certainly seen many sales calls go awry where somebody comes in to be the expert and then finds out that who they're talking to knows a lot more about these products or services than they do. I think that the 3rd thing really is kind of like I referenced a little bit ago, is just trying to find the right mentors and the right people to learn from. So being able to say, I want to learn more and I want to be better and I want to get to understand more aspects of my industry, even outside of what I do, and, kind of finding the right people to support you there. So I've been very fortunate to work in a number of companies where folks kind of took me under their wing and helped me expand.
Mentorship comes up a lot when I ask that question. Is that something that you actively participate in now?
Yeah, I think there's, certainly in a lot of different ways. I try to volunteerism maybe more than mentorship, but I try to get involved in the industry, join committees and nonprofits associated with the industry, join the boards of organizations, and try to give back. But yeah, certainly when I'm even working with my own staff, or even sometimes the vendors that work with me, if I have a sales rep really trying hard, and they're using all the wrong phrases, like I need this to hit my number, I try to work with them to say, here's what's going to help me get a deal over the line for you, but it's, here's the things that won't, so without trying to be patronizing about it, I try to, share what I've learned in a way that hopefully is helping some other folks too.
Right. So if I'm a young salesperson and I don't have a mentor, I want to find the right mentor, how should they go about finding that mentor?
Yeah. I think a lot of industries, are doing more and more, especially during the pandemic, to try to foster that. So I'm involved with a lot of industry groups in the publishing space, where there's, in some cases, even like kind of scholarships or sponsorships, so when we all were getting together for in-person conferences, an example in the publishing space is the Society for Scholarly Publishing. They actively, put out that they want to put out scholarships for people who are younger in the industry to come and attend. From a sales standpoint, I think definitely looking at, if you're on LinkedIn and looking at the organizations that your clients are members of, figure out which ones you feel you might be able to do something for. There was a rep I worked with early on in my career, and he would take any volunteer activity that he could within a group, so he'd be the guy sitting there at the registration table at the conference, signing people in as one of the vendors. And he probably met more people at the registration desk, than anybody actively working our booth at the conference, So I think there's kind of comes to the humility thing. There's really no task that's kind of beneath you as a sales rep. It's kind of like if it's great. I can help sort envelopes, and get to meet 20 other people in the industry as we're doing mailings, at a nonprofit that's associated with our industry. Then it's time well spent if you're getting to meet people and learn more about their aspect of the industry. It helps you sell better.
That's great advice, because you're contributing, you're putting stuff out into the universe. And when you do that, I'm a big believer that good stuff comes back your way.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I think that's a great idea. Thinking back to when you got your start in sales, I love asking this question. When you got your start in sales, what do you wish you had been taught then?
I think, the first job I had in sales, I was, I think I was 16, and I walked into a computer store on Long Island, and I just asked, do you have any summer jobs? And the guy who owned the computer shop was just like, wow, you got the gumption to just walk in and ask for a job? It's future for you in sales, young man, So I started answering the phone, and then he launched a website business. And the next thing it was, hey, why don't you go just drop all these things off at local businesses, all these little flyers. And people started asking me questions, and I had to learn what it was that a website was, because this is the early 90s and not everybody knew. So, I kind of learned just, kind of shoe leather sales, which, like the Fuller Brushman kind of model, which is very different than what I do now. But I think the thing that I picked up pretty quickly, but I wished I'd been given more formal training. I took until I was in, kind of proper sales jobs after college, selling services and learning how to be more collaborative, that there's a knack for anyone in sales. You have a comfort zone to talk about what you offer. And so it's tempting just to kind of, keep talking about, here's another feature, here's how somebody else uses it, here's a use case. So I think there's a temptation there just to tell. And so really for me, the thing that did help really turn my career in a very positive direction was just learning to not talk and just, ask a lot of questions, and let people tell you how they're using their current products, how they're using their services, where their problems are. Because there's a big temptation just to ask a lot of very pointed, probing questions that just help the sales rep advance their own, mission and narrative. Whereas if you can just sit and take notes and just be really patient and see what people want to say, that's a lot more important.
Yeah. Do you remember the first big deal you ever closed?
Yeah. The first kind of big deal, I remember being really proud of a software sale that I did about almost 20 years ago. And that was definitely one of those learning lessons, just because it, was a very complex sale, a lot of stakeholders, a lot of stakeholders on our side internally as well. Yes, absolutely. That one, your first victory and your first big failure always stick with you. Absolutely.
We'll get to the failure.
I got plenty of those. So.
Tell me about your transition from salesperson into sales leadership. What drove you to pursue sales leadership?
Again, that was a mentoring thing. I think I hadn't even seen it coming. I had a mentor actually at this company where we sold software. And I specialized in one of our products, selling it. And the other sales reps ultimately picked up the ability to sell that product or that service offering to their suite of clients. We kind of widened which verticals we were going to sell that to. So I found myself having a targeted territory and selling this offering. But then I also found myself being kind of brought in as like the sales engineer to help these other folks, these other like 20 odd reps, close this work in their space. And the thing I think that I hadn't even seen it as like a sales management thing. I just was kind of like their little, Gilligan, their little buddy, kind of coming along and helping them on the sales call, But I had a mentor, and he really saw what I was doing to help not just show up and talk about this product, but also to try to help my colleagues, get these deals over the line, strategize with them. And so he put me in a management role, and I'll totally admit I was not well trained for it. I was not really well prepared for it. And I learned a lot of stuff by kind of making mistakes in managing people initially. And I had some very patient people that I was fortunate enough to manage. And a lot of them were pretty good at managing up and saying, here's what's really going to help us here, internally. So I was lucky to have a great team that I was asked to manage early on in my career. And I'm still in touch with many of them to this day.
Let's talk about some of those mistakes, because I think there are some very common ones that are made when people transition into a management or leadership role. What were some of the mistakes you made, and what did you take away or learn from that?
Sure. Well, I think the biggest one is that, because something works well for you, you think it's going to work well for everybody else. or even worse, you think that's the way it should be done, So I think there was a lot of learning that I had to do there, that the verbiage I use around, something, the questions I'm going to ask a customer, the way I follow up, it's going to be very different than other people. And it's something I still kind of slap my own wrist about to these days. There's certain methods that I have right now with working with our market to better understand it and engage with people that work really well for me. And they might be geared towards my personality or my approach. But, I'm very lucky to have a very talented sales team working for me at Westchester, and everybody kind of does things a little different, which is something I really embrace now. But early on in my career, I didn't get that as well. And so I found myself probably annoying people by saying, well, why don't you word it this way? Or, that kind of stuff, which is the micromanaging stuff that doesn't help people advance things rather than the strategic stuff that does.
Right. For someone who's considering making the same switch, what advice do you have for them?
I found myself engaged in, kind of training or programming around advancing management after the fact. And, I think even if it's just a matter of signing up for like a single EMBA course, even if you're not going to pursue a full MBA or something like that, there's a lot of good content, especially it's available now through digital learning. Where it kind of ties it back to that humility thing. It's okay to say, I need to know what skills I'm going to really need to do to be successful, and what I need to know interpersonally to kind of work with people where they're going to want to kind of embrace what I'm suggesting. So I think certainly if I had more training, I think earlier on, that probably would have helped me. And it's something where I was fortunate, as I said, to have mentors who taught me that stuff. But I think there's certainly a lot to be said for kind of formalized training on just how to be a better manager.
Right. What's the first thing a person stepping into a sales leadership role should do?
In more typical times, I'd say take each of your reps to lunch and learn a little bit more about them. Of course, it's harder doing that via Zoom, and we have added staff at Westchester over the past year. So, a lot of the ways we get to know people, it's more like this rather than,
Right.
kind of the, come into the office for a week and meet everybody kind of stuff that you typically would do. I think the thing that I typically try to do is ask a lot of questions to find out what ways people approach things, so that what tools they're used to using, how they use those tools, so that anything I'm suggesting is essentially something where I understand kind of where they're coming from rather than telling them how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think really getting to understand not just who the people are and, tell me about your family and that kind of stuff, but more the, tell me how you do what you do and what, why you find these methods successful, what's really worked well for you before, trying to find out people's strengths so that you can help them play to them.
Right. Expanding on that a little bit with this next question, what do you think really makes a successful sales leader?
I think the successful sales leaders are the ones who can ask the right questions of their staff where senior leadership's getting the information that they need to know. I think there can be, especially in the world of CRM, where there's up to the minute data that's in a system. Senior leadership at some companies I've worked at have been up to their sleeves in that data constantly and wanting to see, did this deal move yesterday, and that kind of thing. So I think one of the things that can be beneficial in leadership when working with your team is just being able to help them understand what's being tracked so that they can monitor it and keep it up to date. But then beyond that, helping them kind of navigate the morale piece of it. One of the best managers I ever had used the phrase, don't let the highs get too high and don't let the lows get too low. And that's one I still use with folks now. So, it's almost like the victories are great, but it's how you navigate those losses sometimes. And as a sales leader, I think that's something that, there will be losses, of course. And, kind of helping folks not get discouraged on that. If there are learning lessons, great. But if not, don't beat yourself up trying to find them,
Yeah. Do you have just a funny, crazy sales story you can share with us?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, like anybody in sales, we've all got tons of crazy stories, right? The one that sticks to mind for me was there was it had to be at least a year-long sales cycle we had on a RFP for contract for services. This is several companies ago. That company's not even in business anymore, so I can tell this story. But we participated in an RFP, and with a customer, it's a very demanding customer. They asked a lot of great questions during the sales process. We were awarded the bid, and then there was a pretty long lag between when the bid was awarded and when the project got kicked off to get started. And I went to the kickoff meeting as the sales lead. And as I so I went up the night before and I got a question from the customer. They said, "Oh, when did your flight get in?" I said, "Well, I drove. It's like an hour and a half from our office." And they're like, "Oh, I thought you were out, somewhere else, like Chicago or whatever." It's like, no, nearby, And then the next morning, because I stayed over at a hotel just because we had a very early meeting. The next morning, I get to the meeting and the customer says, here's the stuff we want to cover in our agenda. I forgot to tell you these specific points. And they start rattling up a bunch of specific points, which weren't about what we sold at all. I mean, it wasn't like anywhere. It wasn't like, oh, well, we do that a little differently with our product. It was totally different stuff.
Right.
So we got about 6 hours into this kickoff meeting when it finally dawned on me that they had intended to award this to somebody else. And obviously something went wrong with the procurement process. So there I am having to pull aside this person and say, this is really embarrassing, I think, for all of us. But I don't think you wanted me to come here today. I think you wanted this person from Chicago or whatever,
Yeah.
So, to their credit, they said, well, I think almost it was like, well, procurement, right? It's too late now. But to their credit, they, we took a step back, did a gap analysis. They said, well, these are the things that, we really need. And we were able to focus on those core competencies. But kind of having that whole mistaken identity thing at dinner, and it didn't dawn on me. I get there in the morning, and then it takes me several hours to finally just go, I don't think you meant to hire us, for this very large contract, So I mean, I think certainly there's always the other wacky just road stories traveling around and all that, but I mean that kind of thing just always sticks with me. So
that's a crazy sales story.
Yeah.
Holy cow. I'm glad you're able to spin it back though and keep things moving. That's awesome. Let's transition a little bit to the sad part of sales, rejection.
Sure.
What's the deal that you lost that just, you thought you had it and you lost it and it just hurt?
Yeah. I mean, there was one, we had a customer who flew to meet with us many times at our headquarters. We were getting all the right buying signals. I nearly bought a car based on the projected commission, nothing fancy, but it was like I needed a new car. And I was like, well, I'm going to be able to get the down payment. This is great. Went to the showroom, took a test drive. Thankfully, my dad raised me to always wait until you actually had the check in your hand before you spend it,
Yep.
But yeah, this was a huge contract, which, at the last minute, they said, oh, we went another way. And that was one where, it wasn't just me that was duped as the sales rep, kind of putting on my happy ears and wanting to hear the good stuff and not hear the bad stuff. Everybody on our management team had heard the same things. The fact that they kept coming out and doing all of these meetings, told us it was down to us and this other vendor. Here's why we like you best, all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And ultimately was something that was a decision that we didn't have the right, even though they were senior in their own organization, they didn't have the right buying, permissions to just make it happen on their own. And so they ended up having to anybody, be beholden to somebody else on something, and that the deal went the other way. But yeah, I mean, those kinds of ones really, they're kind of a gut punch. They take the wind out of your sails, especially when everybody else was counting on it. It's definitely one of those things that sticks with you. So it's not one that wakes me up in the middle of the night, but certainly if there's a regret, that's an easy one to look back on. Yeah.
So when you're mentoring and coaching your team and they're dealing with rejection, do you draw upon those experiences or how do you draw on those experiences when you talk with them?
Yeah, well, I mean, that don't let the highs get too high thing, right? I quote that one a lot. And not just for pithy maxims, but it's true. I think we, in sales, the thing that I try to track metrically with each rep is what our typical batting average looks like. How many conversations we have with companies that need their content edited, typeset, created. Where we lose, is it people want to keep the work in-house, because they have a greater level of trust there? Is it that there's other competitors that are cheaper? Is it that a project just doesn't happen? And so what I try to do is just be objective with folks and say, well, why did we lose? What are the things that we could have done differently, if any? But more often than not, it's really just a matter of kind of looking at those losses and just saying, well, of course, like anything in sales, it's a numbers game. We're going to talk to 100 publishers across their sales team in a given week. And if we close 100 deals a week, well, we'd be millionaires and that'd be great, but the fact of the matter is just part of the job is just having these conversations and finding when people are finally at the position where they need our services, and we're happy to help. But if they don't need our services, that's okay too. And we, hopefully we take something good away from each conversation and can revisit those folks later.
Do you do that as part of every, like a retrospective as soon as you lose that deal, or is that a more of a periodic thing where like every quarter you do it?
There's three things really. So as we do each loss, I certainly catch up with the rep to see what's going on. If there's anything we can take away, the samples from this other company were more in line with what the customer was thinking of, that kind of thing. Is there anything objective that they shared that's helpful to know? As far as, kind of longer term processes, I do pull up each quarter, usually not with each individual rep, but just looking at the losses and just seeing, are we off the pace? And if so, is it because we were, we had so many opportunities in the pipeline? Is there, some other cause? But every year at the end of the year, between Christmas and New Year's, I sit down and I kind of run what I call our baseball card, and it's just kind of every stat that we have based on the KPIs in the system. How many opportunities do we create? How many do we close? How many are stagnant? And reasons why. And we do in our CRM, and I know we'll talk a little bit more about CRM in a minute, but in our CRM system, we do track each loss. We track a bunch of data points on each loss, the causes, the reasons, if there was a competitive loss with this competitor and why. So there's a bunch of stuff that's text boxes that are a little harder to put into a baseball card, but there's also a lot of stuff that is just data points we can extract in a spreadsheet and put into a dashboard essentially to look at, how we're doing.
If you're you're hearing this, you're listening to the podcast, but if you're wondering how to track losses, what he just described, that's how you track your losses. That is spot on. When we work with people, we come in, a lot of times we don't see that. A lot of times people don't want to worry about the losses, but you're missing a huge opportunity, I think, if you're not doing that. So when it comes to CRM technology, do you love it or do you hate it?
Oh, I love it. I love it. The earliest sales jobs I had, actually, real quick anecdote. One of the first sales jobs I had out of college was at a .com. And I was, kind of big beard hippie, and here I am trying to wear a suit and blend in, and everybody at the .com was kind of, who's this guy in a suit with a huge beard, So the first day on the job, I was there just as like the office admin. It was just a job I took out of college so I could get my career going, kind of thing.
Right.
And the guy who was the sales manager, he said, "Come here," and he brought me into a room that had just like office supplies scattered all over. And he said, "Could you organize the office supplies?" He said, "and then I want you to write down on a notepad every office supply that we have." And he said, "How many pencils? How many?" He said, "Don't count the individual paper clips. Just how many boxes of paper clips." He said, "Just write up an inventory." So I said, "Okay." So I did this on a legal pad. He says, "Great, go put this in Excel." And so I went and put it in Excel. And he was like, "Great, you're working with me now." And so I became a sales coordinator. And he was a great mentor who really brought me into the mix. But what he told me after the fact was that was an exercise to see if I had an attention to detail, where if I was going to help him on projects, would I be able to keep it up to date in the system that he had? And I think we were using Goldmine at the time. This is like, 2000, 1999, something like that. It was all for, so like that, he really helped mentor me, and I'm still in touch with him. He's a good friend. And he really taught me the power and the value of CRM. And that basically was like, if you have any piece of information, it goes in there. Here's the important stuff that you want to track though, because otherwise it turns into a shoebox full of receipts, So he really guided me on how he was using Goldmine for this small .com startup. He ended up leaving 3 months later because it was the .com era in the late 90s. And I followed him to another startup. And, same thing there. We built a CRM system. And in that case, we were able to actually buy a list of all the clients in this one particular market. And that was really the first time I had a full CRM that I could slice and dice. And so since then, even at Westchester, my first thing on the job was setting up a CRM system for us, before we even started picking up the phone and calling customers when I, joined the company about 7 years ago. So it's definitely, for me, it's an organizing principle that helps me better understand the market. But to your point, helps understand where we're winning and where we're losing.
Yep. So when you were thinking back when you started at Westchester, and you said the first thing you did was, or one of the first things was implement CRM,
Mhm.
What was your definition of success for that CRM implementation?
The definition of success I had was that I wanted the senior team, both in kind of executive management as well as in, operational management and kind of mid management, to be able to see what we were looking at as far as new potential business. So my definition of success was when we finally got to the point, and it took a lot of iterations because this was the way the company had tracked stuff before was in more siloed compartments of data.
Right.
And so by putting everything into one big box where all of a sudden we could pull a report and look at it on the wall in the conference room, it opened up a lot of discussions about, let's look at what our batting average is in this market. Why are we not winning more business here? And so the success there was, and it took probably a good year before we had enough data to make it actionable, because you can create the skeleton and fill in the back data that the company had from its decades of existence.
Yep.
But it took us a while till we had enough opportunities in the mix where we were tracking where we won, where we lost, how many people we were talking to or just went stagnant, where we started to understand what those trends are. And it's different from market to market. In publishing, there's always a level of interest in talking about different ways of doing things. And there's also different times where that's going to be better to put into effect than others. So the fact that we had stagnant opportunities didn't necessarily mean that these were individual buying inflection moments that we missed. It was just kind of, well, it's a good thing we spoke with this publisher, because when they are ready now, we're able to kind of put that into place. So there were a lot of those kinds of things where once we were able to have that cross-department dialogue to help fuel the direction of the services we could offer and getting everybody at the table on those discussions, rather than just kind of, here's the spreadsheet, take a look, which is what it initially started at, because we didn't have enough data. Once we had people actually slicing and dicing that information, that made me feel like we had a success in place.
Was there anything through that process that was harder than the rest, that was more of a struggle?
Yeah, I think getting to the right level of information for everybody, because different stakeholders are going to have different levels of detail that they want to have on a deal, that they want to have on a customer, that they want to have on in reports. So it took a lot of calibrating around to put together kind of like a report that we still produce every week of the pipeline and what information was important to have in there. Because it took a lot of calibration so that everybody was happy with that report and we weren't having to create separate versions for different departments' needs. So and it's still something we calibrate. We, typically once a year, we kind of take a step back, look at what we're doing in our CRM system and revise it.
Right. So I'm going to ask you to stretch here a little bit because you've been through this. For people that are going to be in your shoes and they're like, hey, I'm coming to this place, I know they don't have a CRM. What should be their keys for success? What should they be worried about?
The first piece, I think, is always knowing what their own strengths and weaknesses are on implementing a CRM. So there's a reason there are so many people who are CRM consultants, that these systems can be as simple or as complex as you like. So I think kind of just first off, knowing what your own capabilities are. Is this something you can handle? And I was fortunate enough, just trial by fire over my career, having had to do so much with CRM systems, that I could implement one when I came to Westchester. If I was coming into a company 10 times our size, there was no way I would have been able to accomplish what we needed. If it's something that was going to have 100 plus licenses or something like that.
Right.
So I think knowing one's own limitations, knowing what resources are out there to help, but also the other key piece that I think anybody coming into a new operation, which is going to really kind of embrace CRM or relaunch CRM, is supporting data. So, I mean, we're big fans of certain products that are, kind of like databases online where we can look up businesses and load their info. And, there's tons of good ones out there. We're big fans of trying to make sure we understand the universe of prospects there, so that we can, kind of know whatever data we can backload onto our existing data. If we can get data about revenue, number of employees, that kind of thing, that's the kind of stuff where it starts to help you find the trends of who are the people who are our customers, who are the accounts we don't ever seem to win. So I think kind of adding data that's externally sourced is very helpful out of the gate when you're trying to start to analyze things, because you won't have enough data yet from your own wins and losses to analyze what's working and what's not.
Yeah, that's great advice, because that's something we talk about with our clients and prospects, is that, it's expensive to have someone sitting there keying on all this data. Take advantage of, there's so much out there, like you said, and it's so easy these days to build those integrations to get that data coming in. And really augment and flush out that data set so it becomes really actionable. That's terrific advice. Tyler, if people want to reach out, we're coming to our end here of Sales Lead Dog. If people want to reach out and connect with you, what's the best way for them to connect and maybe learn more about your firm?
Sure. Well, the firm itself, WestchesterPublishingServices.com. They can feel free to browse around there. It includes links to our subsidiary in the UK, our subsidiary that focuses on education services. So if anybody's looking for somebody to help them create, edit, or typeset or digitally produce content, they can certainly learn about that there. If anybody's interested in connecting with me personally, just for following up on any of these points here, I'm on LinkedIn, and I know you'll have the link in the podcast notes. Always happy to connect with folks and learn more about their aspects of the industry.
That's awesome. Thank you again for coming on Sales Lead Dog. It has been terrific talking with you and listening to you.
Oh, my pleasure, Christopher. I enjoy the podcast, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to participate. Thanks a lot.
Awesome. Thank you again.
As we end this discussion on Sales Lead Dog, be sure to subscribe to catch all our episodes. On social media, follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Watch the videos on YouTube, and you can also find our episodes on our website at impellercrm.com/Sales Lead Dog. Sales Lead Dog is supported by Impeller CRM, delivering objectively better CRM for business, guaranteed.